Welcome back. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Zoe Grunewald.
And me, Ali Milani.
So Donald Trump has thrown geopolitics into chaos after kidnapping Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. With their confidence boosted, it seems their eyes are now set firmly on Greenland. Joining us now to try and make sense of this breakdown in the international order is Professor of International Studies at the Clinton Institute in Dublin and founder of the EA WorldView, Scott Lucas. Scott, thank you so much for joining us on the programme today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here. I'm not sure I can make sense of it, but we'll at least try to describe how bad it's gotten.
That's all we can ask of you, so thank you very much. Listen, before we get into the international state of things, as it always is with Trump, things move very, very quickly. And so often a news story emerges. And obviously, looking within the US, last night, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, better known as, shot Renee Nicole Good in her car in Minnesota. They claimed that she attempted to run over ICE officers, but videos of the incident suggest she was attempting to drive away. You've previously described the Trump administration as acting as a kind of mafia government. Is this indicative of that?
I think it's something which is beyond being a mafia government, because when you're a mafia, there's sort of rules you play by, even when you're in organized crime. I mean, when you operate protection rackets, you go and you say, all right, we'll leave you in peace if you pay us the money, else we'll whack you. What happens when you send masked, unidentified men with guns into communities who have no accountability? It's not like police. It's not like you can record. It's not like you can make a complaint. When they have no accountability, you're beyond even mafia behavior. You're unleashing intimidation and harassment and the possibility of terrorizing neighborhoods. And you're doing it with the idea that no one can stop you. To get to the point where we got to when Renee Good was killed yesterday, the Trump camp, not everyone in the administration agrees with it, but the Trump camp defied numerous court orders to rein this in. They have defined those legislators in Congress who've called on them to be responsible. They have defied state and local officials, not just politicians, law enforcement agencies. They have effectively, let's call it what it is, because it's a term which is more applicable to politics than just simply saying organized crime. It's authoritarian. This is the way. If we saw this type of behavior taking place in Iran, and indeed we can talk about what's happening in Iran right now, when the forces of the leadership killed someone in cold blood, we would rightly call it out. If we saw this happen in, for example, Russia, when the Kremlin just simply unleashed people to intimidate anybody who might be opposed to their invasion of Ukraine, right, we would call it out. So if we were going to call it out in other countries when this happens as being beyond any acceptability, beyond any justification or rationalization, why do we not do the same in the United States just because it happens to be the United States? So that's why I'm hoping we can analyze things today, but you're going to hear me be full and frank, because I will now say something to you. You can tell from the accent that I was born and raised there, and you can't be completely disconnected from what happens in the country where you grew up. And to see in 2026 a country which has been flawed, never been perfect. I can tell you about many criticisms I made of it. But when you see what is effectively a group of largely men, but a few women, who effectively are treating the country as their personal business, a business which is completely unchecked and unregulated. And when they think they can count through dog whistle politics on their particular media outlets to both sides' issues, to put up false equivalences, to even in the case of Renee Nicole Good, 37 years old, a mother of 3 children who lived with her partner in Minneapolis, a poet, a woman who admittedly said, I strummed the guitar badly. She used a ruder phrase, but you get the drift. When they can come out within minutes of her being killed and on their media outlets smear her as a domestic terrorist, and by the end of last night, effectively saying she deserved to be killed because she used pronouns and she was in a lesbian relationship, how did my country get to this point?
So you're talking there about Fox News, obviously, highlighting that Renee Good had pronouns in her bio and leaves behind a partner and a child from a previous marriage. And J.D. Vance described her as a deranged leftist. I think you touched on something really interesting about this particular government, which is we have seen a lot of authoritarian governments play out throughout history. But the thing I find particularly bizarre, or I mean, that was obviously understanding about this government is it doesn't just operate through force, although it clearly does. It operates through doublespeak, lies. Something will happen and it will blatantly tell you, no, you didn't see that. That's not what occurred. Donald Trump will give justifications for his actions that barely match up with what the public can see. It isn't even propaganda. It's so blatant, but it's just this kind of continuous denial of the truth, even though as we see it in front of us. And you would think in this day and age with the technology we have, with the availability of video evidence, that couldn't be a mechanism through which authoritarian leaders can operate. But Donald Trump does, and his government does.
Wow. I mean, I've written a book, hoping it'll eventually be published one day, which is about the run-up to Trump and Trump's first term and trying to think how we got to this point. And if you don't mind, I'll set it into a little bit of wider context. When he ran for president in 2016, America's always been a country of spectacle. Now, I know other countries have their spectacles as well. We can talk about last night at the proms or whatever here, but in America, it's those crazy spectacles. If you've ever been to our sporting events, you've ever been to one of our big concerts, or if you've ever been to one of our political conventions, it's all the razzmatazz. It's the balloons, it's the fireworks, it's the bombastic speeches. And Trump exploited that spectacle. See, Trump exploited it as a reality TV star. I mean, he was a failed businessman, 6 bankruptcies. And what saves Trump? It's the spectacle of being the first guy on The Apprentice before Lord Sugar. And then it's being a star of all things, something I've known since I was a boy, what was then called the World Wrestling Federation. And he learned how to trash talk. He learned how to put people down. He learned the quick sound bites that would get attention. And he took all of that from his business days and that instinct to bully people, and he took it on the road in 2015, 2016, and the media didn't call him to account for it. And for all the talk, and I can take care of this, the American media is supposedly dominated by the liberals and left wing. They lapped up the spectacle where he got far more airtime than anybody else. And then, I don't know if you all remember the point in 2016, when he stalked Hillary Clinton across the debate stage. He literally stalked her across the debate stage. Only a few days after he had been called out for sexually accosting women. But people just went into the spectacle. They just bought all of that. So once he becomes president, you just keep the spectacle going. And people can try to fact check him. They can try to say, no, this is the reality. But if he can sell the spectacle, then you can get to the point, which is where we are today. And some people have been using this quote from George Orwell. In the end, they taught them to disregard or disbelieve their own eyes and what they heard with their own ears.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for joining us, man. I have a broader question for you. So I want to kind of bring in some of Venezuela and some of what's happened in Minneapolis. I am a little bit of an American politics nerd. My degree was in American politics. And I got off the plane from Washington, D.C. about 4 hours ago. So I was in D.C. as this all unraveled. And a member of the House, I won't say their name, kind of mentioned to me in passing of, I don't know if we can withstand another 3 years of this. And folks might not know, but a lot of the American system, but the original founding fathers designed it with a British king in mind. There are no kings here. So the system has checks and balances all over the place. The House checks the Senate checks the executive, the Supreme Court checks everyone, and the media acts as the fourth estate, if you will. But now what we've got is a US president going essentially to war with Venezuela, if we're honest, without getting congressional approval. Yeah. We've got federal agencies shooting people in the face 4 times, and then the head of the federal government, before any investigation is done, coming out and saying this was self-defense, this person was trying to kill ICE officers. The media are saying essentially pronouns in her bio has something to do with it, and referring to her having lesbian partners and children from a previous message. The vice president on Twitter is calling the woman killed a deranged leftist. So my question is, all these checks and balances, some might argue, held him at bay in his first term, but are now starting to crumble. Can America withstand 3 more years of this guy?
And there's the question. I mean, I've been saying it for years, but each year it gets more intense. And that is, this is the critical time in America that in peacetime it has not had since 1865, which, having done the politics degree, you're going to know is the end of the U.S. Civil War. And the reason why I say that is that executives have abused their power in the past. We can talk about, previous U.S. administrations that have gone in and staged coup in Latin American countries, supported military dictatorships. We can talk about abuses of power against protesters, right? For example, during the Vietnam War.
Correct.
For example, more recently during protesting against the U.S. and Central America in the 1980s. But those administrations, they at least nominally played by the rules of the game. They at least nominally played by the rules of the game that if the courts ruled against you, you had to pull back from what you've done. That if Congress passed a bill that limited your power and they overrode your veto, you had to accept that. When someone broke the rules of the game so flagrantly, like Richard Nixon did in the 1970s, he was forced out of office, right? And Ronald Reagan was almost forced out of office in the late 1980s because of Iran-Contra.
Yeah.
The difference here is
Iran-Contra, by the way, with Trump would be Wednesday night. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like, here we are in 2026, and what you have is these guys don't, and women, they flagrantly flout the rules of the game. When the courts rule against them, they simply do not abide by the court order, as you can talk about when they have disappeared, not just undocumented immigrants, but legal immigrants, for example, in El Salvador. When Congress tries to limit them in terms of what they might do, for example, with the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, they simply don't follow the procedure. They never inform Congress about the operation which took place, and then they mobilize their allies to go on the talk shows to explain why somehow this was actually a legal operation against a narco-terrorist. When the media tries to call them to account with facts, they stigmatize them. They even encourage at times violence against them. When activists stand up against them, they characterize them as the radical left or extremist or as domestic terrorist. And that's what you have to realize, that Donald Trump has never believed in abiding by the rules of the game. I mean, he's always done this when he was a businessman. But you have to look at certain advisors as well, because a lot of what we pin on Trump is actually coming from a group of people who, in line with this notorious document, Project 2025, run by, put out by the Heritage Foundation, but with Trumpists writing most of the material, they came into office to destroy any possible resistance within the government. That's why they went after the agencies immediately. That's why they fired people. That's why they replaced senior people. That's why they abolished entire agencies as well. Because the idea was, you have to be loyal to us. You have no autonomy here. And I think that's not a pro or anti-Trump position. That's not Democrat. That's not Republican. That's not right. That's not left. That is a question of the U.S. system and whether you have people such as Stephen Miller, probably the most important advisor to Donald Trump, when you have J.D. Vance, who is aspiring to be president in 2028, when you have Pete Hegseth, that's the question, or Kristi Noem at Homeland Security. Is there anything that they will recognize in terms of accountability or a limit on their authority? And I think the answer quite simply is no.
But let's move now to international issues, particularly what has happened at the weekend in Venezuela and the Trump administration's kidnap of Nicolas Maduro. Scott, talk us through what happened. And I'm particularly interested to get your view on a lot of people were quite surprised by this. I think a lot of people thought when Donald Trump became president, he would be fairly isolationist. Those were the messages he sort of gave off. But actually, there is an argument to be made that this very much fits with Donald Trump's version of isolationism, which is that, you know, America, whatever he deems to be America, can do whatever it wants.
Yeah, I actually think the better word for it, if you were being rational, would be unipolar. Now it's really strange. That word was in vogue more than 20 years ago, going into the Iraq War in 2003 under the little Bush administration, because the idea was we're going to make America the dominant power anywhere. Nobody going to mess with us. And, you know, this is never was an isolationist administration. I mean, for goodness sake, look, an isolationist administration does not bomb Nigeria, which they did a few weeks ago, even when the Islamic State were on the other side of the country, so that they weren't even the target. An isolationist country does not bomb Iran, albeit alongside Israel, when they do that. An isolationist country does not say, well, we're going to take not only Greenland, we'll take Panama, we will take the oil from other countries, we will possibly overthrow Cuba. You know, that's not an isolationist. What it is, and what makes it different is that rather than being this organized, state-based attempt to dominate the world, it almost becomes a personal vision, a personal ideological vision of this group that we talked about before the break. And before getting to Venezuela really quick, if you want to look at the clues that are there, they put out a national security strategy a month ago. Now, these have come out since the early days of the Cold War. This was like bread and butter for my academic career. What was different about this national security strategy is it was simply absolutely forthright in terms of, first of all, we dominate wherever we want to. So they reiterated, and this comes into play with Venezuela, and you all know this from your politics degrees, the old 1823 Monroe Doctrine,
Yeah,
right?
I was just going to
This
say,
is our
yeah.
Western Hemisphere. Don't mess. And on top of that, they reiterated, without actually using the words, but effectively a white nationalist approach. So that's why they said, well, we're going to break up the European Union. We're going to break up the European Union. We're going to support European nationalist governments. And by that, they meant hard right movements like the AfD in Germany, like the National Rally in France, like, dare I say it, the Reform Party in the UK. So this is out there. It's absolutely out there. Now, in terms of what happened with Venezuela, there has been decades of tension between the U.S. and Venezuela since Hugo Chavez took power in the late 1990s. The little Bush administration tried to overthrow him, failed to do so. Chavez's successor, Maduro, in case we need to make it clear, all U.S. sanctions have certainly constrained Venezuela, but Maduro has actually run the country into the ground. You know, when you've got more than 10% of your country fleeing as refugees, that's a serious economic and political administration. He's closed off political space through intimidation, detentions, killings. But for the Trump folks, as they built this up by putting those warships off the coast of Venezuela, there was a combination of motives that were in play here. First was, and I don't underestimate this, it was ego. Donald Trump never served in Vietnam, the infamous bone spurs. Pete Hegseth, his defense secretary, commanded a National Guard unit in Iraq and Afghanistan at a relatively low level, but he's been a TV pundit for years. These guys want to play macho. And Hegseth will tell you that, the macho warrior culture. right? With all of his, by the way, tattoos that could be seen as white power tattoos. We can leave that for people to judge. Beyond ego, you've got the question of oil. And Trump's rambling, chaotic press conference on Saturday after the kidnapping, he laid it out there. I will run Venezuela. We will run Venezuela. Oh, and we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the oil. We're going to sell it. But then beyond that, it was this question of regime change, initially regime change. And this is where you have to bring in someone like Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Cuban descent, has long been a foe of the Cuban government regime, whatever you want to call it, and sees Venezuela as an extension of that. Now, just as one important thing to put in there, because this is how quickly things can change, because they didn't really think through the planning of what they do next after kidnapping Maduro, regime change has become regime coercion. And that is Maduro's gone, but the rest of the government can stay. Acting President Rodriguez, Defense Minister General Pedrino, the Interior Minister, Mr. Cabello. They can stay as long as they do what the U.S. tells them. And of course, the first thing that Trump is saying is they're going to agree that we are going to sell their oil and we're going to keep the money. We'll see if that actually pans out. Linking all of those motives, ego, oil, regime coercion, we come back to that word of domination. And the reason why I emphasize that is because even after they went after Venezuela, almost as a demonstration case, we can do this. They issued threats, and it wasn't just Trump who issued the threats. So did Rubio. So did Hegseth. We can take out Cuba. We can go after Colombia. We can go after Mexico. And of course, the one that goes beyond the Western Hemisphere, we can get Greenland, right? Now, we can go through each of those cases. I mean, I don't think they're going to use military force against Greenland. They're going to use economic pressure and incentives to try to get Greenland to declare independence. But I do think it is not out of the realm of possibility as they run into difficulties in Venezuela, because it will not be easy there, that they decide they go after Cuba to keep themselves in the headlines.
Scott, can I quickly ask you a question? One of the things that astounded me physically being in the Capitol yesterday was after the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, Democrats, mainstream Democrats, were continuing this strategy of kind of walking along the lines of Donald Trump talking points. They were saying, we'll cry no tears of the Maduro campaign. The problem here is what plan is next, right? A sort of soft, light approach on Donald Trump, which hasn't worked for them thus far. I don't know why it'll work for them now. In Trump, you've got someone who will actually, one of the things that's interesting about him is say what his actual motives are. So while Rubio's talking about narco-terrorism and JD's talking about regime change and the brutal dictatorship of the Maduro campaign, Trump shows up on TV and he's like, no, brothers, this is about the oil, right? But the Democrats still won't go for him. The Democrats still have this like cowardice with really going after Trump. How much do you think they are failing their responsibilities, not just to their own political parties, to their constituents, but to the bloody Constitution of the United States?
Yeah, I mean, cowardice or pragmatism. I mean, we can talk about the fact that European leaders, and I would say especially the UK Prime Minister, have actually been very, very cautious in their own statements that they've put out as well in terms of this, which is, Maduro's a bad guy. And Keir Starmer saying, I'm going to have to check to get the facts before I can tell you whether or not international law was broken. But in terms of the Democrats, and I'm not necessarily endorsing it, I'm just reading it if you're the Democrats. Americans have a tendency, which is, it comes from our Westerns, it comes from our culture, all of this about the good guy versus the bad guy. And Maduro, who is quite a nasty individual, he's got the black hat on. So to come out and say, he should have stayed in power, he should have remained there and so on, that may alienate Americans who don't actually care about the niceties of what's happening inside Venezuela, and they don't care about the niceties of international law. So the way the Democrats are playing it is, he's going to drag us into a protracted episode, like Iraq 2003. They're going to keep that image up there, right? And meanwhile, they're not going to give you your health care. They're not going to handle the economy effectively. The rich folks are going to get rich off of the oil, and you're not going to see any of it. Now, I don't, again, from the standpoint of the fact that they won't come out and say international law was broken, this is a terrible precedent. I'm not happy with that,
Scott,
but they are playing on the fact that Trump is going to wind up getting himself in trouble over the next few months on the domestic front.
But Scott,
and then they will,
Can I just say, it's not just international law that's broken. I would argue U.S. domestic law was broken. If he's going to run Venezuela, you are then at war with the current Venezuelan regime, and you need a congressional act to be at war with another country.
Yeah, so and this is this thing about the War Powers Act, right? That they did not consult Congress.
The Democrats. Sorry, go ahead.
But there's a problem here in that successive presidents have defied the War Powers Act.
Yeah.
Reagan did it in the 1980s. Arguably, Big Bush did it with Panama in 1989. And so it's kind of like it's kind of hard to stand on that ground. I think what they're going to wait on is this bizarre idea that it's narco-terrorism, right? So let's be clear here. International law was absolutely stomped on here. But the Trump administration is putting up a domestic legal pretext, which is there's an indictment against Maduro since 2020. So if you're the Democrats, you wait to see that run into trouble. And then you say, well, Christ, you can't even convict him under domestic law properly. This is going to be at best a show trial. And then you put it all together. The thing is, this caught the Democrats on the hop because I think the Democrats were expecting bombing, U.S. airstrikes on Venezuela. And that would have been an easier ground to go in and criticize. Lifting Maduro, it's that problem that the Trump administration has made it personal. And they'll keep saying every time the Democrats come out and criticize it, oh, you're supporting this guy. Just as in 2003, in the run-up to Iraq 2003, if you said, look, this is going to tear the country apart, it's going to get a lot of people killed, they'd say, you're defending Saddam Hussein? Really?
Yeah. Scott, listen, we've only got about 2 minutes left, but I want to ask you this before we wrap up. The one thing that we have been very distracted from over the past week, which was huge in American political conversations not too many weeks ago, is obviously the Epstein files, which have yet to be released in their entirety. How much do you think this is weighing on Donald Trump's mind? How much do you think this might go to explain some of his behavior, some of his decisions over the past week? Do you think that could be an issue that brings Donald Trump down?
Yes. Well, I don't think it'll bring him down. I think it'll erode his power. First of all, I don't buy the wag the dog that they went into Venezuela to divert from Epstein. I mean, I think there were other motives in play here. And I don't think they can, because the fact here is people haven't forgotten that there are more files which are due to come out. And that includes some of Trump's supporters who know there are more files to come out. And the Trump administration has built a rod for its own back because, having said last summer, they'd gone through all the Epstein files. We've gone through all of them. There's nothing there. They said just before the Christmas break, we've got another 5 million pages to go through. 5 million pages. So I think Epstein's going to come back at the same time that we've got Venezuela. But I think the big issue, go back to it's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
You've got an American economy which is flatlining. Despite the nominal 4% GDP growth, you've got inflation going up. You have got relatively limited, if any, job growth, which is taking place. And you're seeing people get hit, in particular with rising cost in key areas like food. And if you look at Donald Trump's approval ratings, where they're tanking, it's on those issues and on healthcare. And I think you talk to me 6 months from now, hopefully you'll let me back before then, but if you talk to me 6 months before now, you'll see an administration in pretty serious trouble on the domestic front.
Scott, thank you so much. That was Scott, Professor of International Studies at the Clinton Institute in Dublin, Scott Lucas. Scott, we'll definitely get you back. There's far more to talk about, so thank you very much. That's it, unfortunately, for Politics Censored today. God, I could have listened to Scott for many more hours. So please join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. where we'll be unwrapping the week's political talking points. Probably still talking about this.
You can stay up to date with the show by following at Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani Live.
And you can find me at Zoe Greenland, but not on X.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at fubarradio.com or via the Fubar Radio app.
Thanks for listening, and see you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.